Imagine a small order of knights born in the hot dust of Jerusalem. Even today, people whisper about their vanished gold, their secrets, and perhaps even their curse. But who were they really? Heroes of God or ruthless bankers? How could they rise from simple pilgrim protection to become the feared warriors of Europe, only to lose everything in a single night? In the next few minutes, we will dive together into a history full of blood, gold, power, and legends that echo into our time. Stay until the end, because what you are about to hear will change your view of the Knights Templar myth forever. Once upon a time, over 1,000 years ago, pilgrims from all over Europe traveled along dusty, dangerous roads to the Holy Land in the hope of seeing the tomb of Christ. But robber warriors and insecurity lurked on these paths. In the midst of this world of fear, a small brotherhood of courageous men was formed. They swore poverty, chastity, and to wield the sword for God. They built castles, they waged wars, and they managed gold in ways kings hardly dared to dream. Their name was the Poor Fellow, soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. We know them today as the Knights Templar. In this film, we do not just tell how they were formed and how they fought. We show how they built a fascinating network around all of Europe, why they were feared by kings, how they eventually perished through intrigue and torture, and why their myth fascinates conspiracy theorists, historians, and filmmakers to this day. Let us now pick up their trail from Jerusalem to Paris, from glory to ashes, and perhaps we will discover what we modern humans can learn from their rise and fall. Come along, we begin now. Have you ever wondered why thousands of men moved from the cool castles of Europe into the scorching sun of Palestine, knowing that they might never return? At the beginning stands a dream and a promise. In the 11th century, many Christians lived with the firm conviction that whoever enters the Holy Land, whoever touches the tomb of Christ once, can save their soul, no matter how sinful their life was before. Jerusalem was not a place like any other. For Christians, Jews, and Muslims, it was the heart of their stories, their prophets, their prayers. After the First Crusade, when European knights conquered Jerusalem in 1099, many believed the Holy Land now belonged to the faithful forever. But reality was different. Between the dusty roads, huzzas, and small villages, dangers lurked. Bandits, rival Muslim princes, endless small skirmishes. For every pilgrim, the holy war began on the journey itself. A fight for survival and for salvation at the same time. Many imagine the Crusades as a single great glorious army, but in truth it was a patchwork of local barons, unsteady alliances, and often poorly organized troops. The greatest error of the Crusaders was underestimating the toughness of the local princes and the power of religion as a force of resistance. While they secured power in their European fortresses through bloodlines and conquest, they created only fragile enclaves in the East, surrounded by enemies. History teaches us that where faith, power, and trade meet, conflicts and great ideas arise. The Holy Land was not only a religious symbol, but also a hub for spices, silk, and knowledge. Whoever controlled it controlled a bridge between the Orient and the Occident. And in the middle of this bubbling cauldron of pilgrims, merchants, and warriors, a small brotherhood formed, born of fear, hope, and the courage to risk their lives for others. But who were they and who led them? Let us now meet Hugues de Payens, the man who turned a bold idea into a movement. What drives a knight to leave behind wealth, titles, and a comfortable life just to protect pilgrims on dusty roads? Hugues de Payens was no ordinary knight. Born into the French nobility, raised in Champagne, he had everything a young nobleman could dream of: land, reputation, a sword that ensured him respect. But in a time when faith was supposed to move mountains, that was not enough. Hugues traveled to the Holy Land, saw the fear in the eyes of the pilgrims who were attacked or murdered by robbers, and he knew that a knight alone can achieve nothing. But a community of knights can make a promise: no pilgrim shall ever be defenseless again. With only 8 companions, he began an experiment in 1119 that could hardly be braver. No more land for themselves. No family, no loot, only a vow of poverty, chastity, obedience, and the sword for God. Thus, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem was born. An idea as simple as it was revolutionary to be a monk and a warrior at the same time. For many of his contemporaries, this was unimaginable. A knight without personal honor, a warrior without loot, a nobleman who begs to protect pilgrims. But precisely this radical letting go of worldly desires made them strong. While other knightly families bled in endless feuds, the Templars bound their strength to a common goal and drew from it a loyalty that was stronger than gold. Perhaps their greatest message for us today lies here. Whoever shares a strong vision can move mountains. From a handful of men, a network grew in a few years that kings asked for advice and begged for loans. But a vision alone is not enough if no one believes in it. How could Hugues de Payens and his knights convince Europe, who helped them turn from a small brotherhood into a recognized order? Have you ever wondered why a simple name like Knights Templar has survived in books, films, and legends to this day? In the beginning, they did not call themselves Knights Templar. Their full title sounded solemn, almost cumbersome: the poor fellow, soldiers of Christ, and of the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. But behind these words lay more than just a name. It was a promise and a message to the world. Poor fellow soldiers was a sign that they renounced worldly wealth, that they wanted to be different from all the pomp, loving nobles of their time. And of the Temple of Solomon, that was their spiritual foundation. On the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where they received their first quarters, the Crusaders believed they were encountering the remains of King Solomon's temple, a place where God once dwelt, a place that gave their mission divine legitimacy. Many thought at the time that the name was just symbolism, but it was an instrument, a knightly order with a direct connection to the holiest site in Jerusalem. That gave them an aura that impressed kings and gripped the faithful. Compared to other orders like the Hospitallers or Teutonic Knights, the name of the Templars so clearly connected holiness with armed power. No wonder, then, that soon all of Europe simply called them Knights Templar. Sometimes a name is worth more than any weapon. It creates identity, trust, and a myth that outlasts centuries. To this day, Templar resonates not only with chivalry but also with mystery, power, and legend. But a name alone does not make power. To survive, the Templars needed strong legitimacy, not only among knights and kings, but above all from the most powerful institution of their time, the Church. What distinguishes a horde of armed men from a brotherhood that outlasts centuries? It is more than just the sword. It is the rule. When Hugues de Payens and his companions spent their first nights in the old palace on the Temple Mount, they had little besides their armor and their faith to hold them together. They needed order and a common way of life that was stronger than gold or blood. So they turned to a model that had shaped monasteries for centuries: Benedict of Nursia. His monastic rule was famous for discipline, humility, and obedience. But for men who wanted to be monks and warriors at the same time, a special adaptation was needed. Thus, the Templar rule was born: 72 articles at the beginning, later over 600. Every detail regulated, from clothing to silence at the table, from the distribution of weapons to the handling of loot. While other knights spent their time hunting, in tournaments, or in feuds, the Knights Templar lived by clear commandments. No personal property, everything belonged to the order. No visits from women in the commanderies. Chastity was the law. Obedience was absolute. A command from the Grand Master weighed heavier than one's own life. Many considered this exaggerated, but precisely this severity created a trust that convinced royal courts and believers alike whoever sacrifices their personal well-being can be entrusted with land, money, and responsibility. Discipline is an invisible shield. It binds people who otherwise have nothing in common to a goal. For the Templars, it was the backbone of their success, stronger than any castle wall. But rules alone do not win battles. How can one pray and kill at the same time? For the Knights Templar, this was no contradiction, but their deepest identity. When a Templar got up early in the morning, he did not do so first as a knight, but as a monk. His day began in prayer, in silent devotion in the community of his brothers, but hardly had the last line of the psalm faded away when the humble servant of God became an armored guardian of the holy roads. Shield, sword, helmet, everything ready to hand. The Templars were neither just monks nor just soldiers. They were both, and precisely that made them unique. An example: while normal soldiers in the Holy Land often fought for loot, payment, or glory, the Knights Templar swore poverty to themselves. They took no personal spoils of war, no ransoms for captured enemies. Everything belonged to the order, an unwritten promise that they argued not for gold, but for God. It is said that a Templar could sink to his knees in prayer 1 second and stand with a drawn sword in front of a caravan the next moment to protect pilgrims. For their enemies, this was confusing. Are they monks who forgive, or warriors who fight to the death? The answer was both. This spiritual DNA shows us something important. True strength arises when one unites opposites within oneself: calmness and determination, gentleness and courage. Whoever can live both can hardly be shaken by anything. And the Templars needed exactly this inner strength on the battlefield. What made a handful of order knights into a force that even sultans feared? It was more than courage. It was method. The early years of the Templars were still improvised. A few swords, simple armor, a lot of faith. But with every secured pilgrim path, every new brother in the order, their experience and professionalism grew. Soon they were no longer a loose group, but a disciplined force. Their strength lay not only in the sword arm, but in clever planning. Scouts, fast cavalry troops, deep formations of well-trained knights, and lighter-armed sergeants. Everyone knew what to do, even in the chaos of a burning battle. A famous example is the fortress crack des Chevaliers. Although primarily a seat of the Hospitallers, the Templars erected comparable castles in Tortosa or Safed. These fortresses were not just walls of stone, but highly modern defensive systems: thick walls, baileys, defensive towers, well-organized storerooms. A Templar on the wall knew that behind him lay a fortress that could withstand for months, and around him brothers who supported him in prayer and in battle. The true victory does not always belong to the stronger, but to the smarter. The Templars were masters at forming a superior force from a few men, well-planned walls, and clear tactics, long before the word elite unit even existed. Dust and ancient walls. But for millions of believers, it was the gate to heaven, the Temple Mount. For the first Knights Templar, their quarters were more than just a practical shelter. King Baldwin Sequii gave them rooms in the former palace on the Temple Mount, that place which the Crusaders considered the remains of the legendary Temple of Solomon. For a medieval Christian, Solomon's temple was a place of divine wisdom and infinite order, a place where heaven and earth touch. Imagine a small group of knights day and night surrounded by this myth. Every step through the halls was like a silent prayer. Every lookout over Jerusalem a reminder: we watch over God's heritage. This symbolic place gave them an unshakable identity. Where other knights hoisted their banners on castles, the Templars lived in the holiest place imaginable. Reports from that time tell that pilgrims, when they arrived in Jerusalem, first sought out the Templars. They were considered guardians not only of the city, but also of the heavenly order. Even their enemies respected this holy reference. And for Europe, the Temple Mount became a magical sound in the name: Knights Templar. Sometimes it is not possession itself that gives power, but the history we tell ourselves about it. For the Templars, a place was a promise. We are more than soldiers. We are the keepers of God's house. How could a small order in Jerusalem suddenly crisscross all of Europe with castles, courts, and offices? In the beginning there were only 9 men, a few swords, and the holy hill in Jerusalem. But soon the Templars understood: whoever is strong only in the east loses if the ships from Europe fail to arrive. So they built a network that was as dense as the trade routes themselves. From Paris to London, from Sicily to Acre, they spanned a web of commanderies, fortified farms, administrative centers, and small castles. Every commandery was at once a monastery, barracks, bank branch, and guest house for pilgrims. Brothers lived here, trained, stored, planned. From here donations, taxes, and messages flowed between East and West. An example, the famous Paris Temple Commandery in the middle of the city quickly developed into a hub for financial transactions of the French crown. Some kings even stored their treasuries here in the conviction that no place was safer. Or think of London, the Temple Church. There was not only God's house but part of an entire Templar quarter that brought together merchants, lawyers, and knights. In a time without telephones and the internet, the Templars created what we know today as global logistics. Their secret trust, clear rules, and a system in which everyone knew, my small farm is part of something bigger. Imagine, as early as 800 years ago, a pilgrim in Paris could deposit money and withdraw it safely in Jerusalem. The Knights Templar made it possible. In the beginning, money was only a means to an end for the Templars, building castles, equipping knights, supplying pilgrims. But soon they realized whoever moves money safely becomes irreplaceable. So they developed one of the earliest international banking systems in Europe. A pilgrim who wanted to go to Jerusalem no longer had to travel with heavy gold and fear for his life. He deposited his coins at a Templar commandery in London or Paris and received a secret, sealed document. This paper could later be exchanged in the Holy Land for the corresponding value. But they did not just keep money, they also lent it to princes, to nobles, yes, even to entire kingdoms. For example, the French king financed his wars partly with Templar loans. With interest, of course. Their fortresses were therefore not only military bulwarks but also vaults. Some historians even call them the inventors of the traveler's check. Trust is the foundation of every bank. The Knights Templar proved that whoever manages honestly, calculates wisely, and respects strict rules can turn alms into a financial empire. Some called them soldiers of God. Others saw in them clever administrators who steered entire villages and markets like a medieval corporation. Military strength and clever banking were not enough for the Knights Templar. They knew a sword alone protects no castle if bread and water are missing. Therefore, wherever they received land, they built a stable economic structure: fields, mills, vineyards, livestock breeding. Every farm, whether in France, Spain, or England, was carefully managed. Peasants worked on their fields, millers ground corn, and on market days dues flowed into the order's coffers. An example from Champagne: there the Templars owned large estates that not only supplied grain for their castles in the Holy Land, but also sold surpluses on local markets. Or in Portugal, the Templars helped rebuild abandoned villages after the Reconquista. In return, they received land titles and tax revenues. Thus, the order became one of the largest landowners in Europe, from small farms to entire villages. Power is not just a question of swords or gold. Whoever cultivates fields, builds mills, and revives markets masters the lives of people. Day by day, loaf by loaf. At the beginning, there were no castles, no banks, no power games, only the protection of people on a dangerous path. The first task of the Knights Templar was as simple as it was brave. Christians who were to travel thousands of kilometers should arrive safely at their destination. At the Tomb of Christ in Jerusalem, the dusty roads were full of robbers, the hills full of ambushes. Pilgrims usually carried no sword, but only their prayers in their luggage. For bandits, they were easy prey. Here the Templars stepped in. They rode ahead, secured bottlenecks, escorted entire pilgrim trains. Some traditions report that a Templar rode on his horse for hours next to an old woman, just so she could pray without fear. For the believers, they were angels with swords. For the kings, they were life insurance. As long as the pilgrims came, trade flourished and crusade propaganda remained alive. In England, rich families paid to ensure their relatives came safely to the Holy Land and back, and every saved pilgrim brought stories home, stories of bravery and God's protection by the knights. Whoever offers protection to others gains trust. That applies then as it does today. From the simple duty to protect pilgrims grew the strongest legitimacy of the order. We do not fight for us, we fight for you. There are battles that turn an entire age. Hattin was one such battle. It was July 1187, burning sun over the northern Palestinian steppe. The Crusader army, including hundreds of Knights Templar, followed their King Guy of Lusignan and rode into a trap. Saladin, the legendary sultan, had lured them cleverly away from safe fortresses deep into the arid land far from water sources. For days the sun burned, the armor became ovens, thirst wore down even the bravest knights. When the Muslim riders struck, the Christians were exhausted, torn apart, hopelessly scattered around two hills, the Horns of Hattin. A historian wrote, "There the pride of the Crusaders broke in the shimmering heat. For the Knights Templar it was a catastrophe. Almost their entire elite was killed or taken prisoner. Saladin, impressed by their courage, feared their fanatical steadfastness so much that he had many of them executed, an unusually harsh action for that time." The fall of Hattin opened Jerusalem to Saladin's armies. Only a few weeks later, the Holy City was lost, a shock for all of Europe. Sometimes courage is not enough when water is missing and tactics are disregarded. Hattin shows us to this day arrogance and poor planning can tear down even the strongest walls. It is said that whoever loses Jerusalem loses more than a city. He loses his heart. After the defeat at Hattin, the way was clear. Saladin's troops advanced almost unhindered. The proud city, which had moved so many pilgrims to tears, was weakly defended. Its walls crumbled in the face of a superior army. For the Knights Templar, Jerusalem was more than just a headquarters. It was their birthplace, their holy anchor. The walls on the Temple Mount, which they proudly called Solomon's heritage, suddenly stood defenseless. The defenders, led by the brave Balian of Ibelin, knew that a storm attack would be suicide for the citizens, so they negotiated, and in the end, Jerusalem opened peacefully for Saladin. Many Christians could leave for a ransom, others lost everything. For the Templars, this meant they had to pack what they could carry: archives, relics, memories. Their spiritual center, the reason why they were called Knights Templar, was lost. Overnight, the guardians of the holiest city became refugees looking for new fortresses. Many moved to Acre on the coast, the new glimmer of hope. When a symbol falls, faith wavers. But whoever truly lives their conviction finds new ways. The Knights Templar did not bury Jerusalem. They continued with new hardness in other places. Acre now became their new bastion, their last major base in the Holy Land. Here they gathered their strength. Here they swore never to yield without a fight. When all seems lost, one clings to the last stone. For the Knights Templar, this stone was called Acre. After the fall of Jerusalem, Acre on the coast was the last great hope of the Crusaders. A port city, lively, fortified, a gateway to the west. The Knights Templar made Acre their new headquarters, a mighty fortress complex directly on the water with thick walls, watchtowers, and secret tunnels. Here they stacked weapons, supplies, documents, everything that could ensure survival. When ships came from Europe, Acre was the first port. Pilgrims, knights, merchants, everything streamed through its gates, and right in the middle the Knights Templar, guardians of the wall, administrators of the warehouses, last defenders of the Christian East. The Mamluks, the powerful Muslim warriors of Egypt, wanted to break Acre at any cost. In 1291 they advanced with a huge army. Weeks of siege, catapults, storm attacks. Reports tell how the Knights Templar fought in the wall passages, even when the rest of the city was already in flames. When everything was lost, they retreated into their fortress and held out until the bitter end. A last bastion is more than stone and mortar. It is a symbol of steadfastness. Acre shows us honor does not end with victory, but with the courage to stand for what one believes in until the last breath. Sometimes a safe harbor can also be a golden cage. Thus Cyprus became for the last Knights Templar. After the fall of Acre in 1291, the Templars had hardly a choice left. The Holy Land was lost, their castles in ruins, their brothers fallen or scattered. Cyprus, for years an important base for supply and recruitment, now became their emergency home. In Limassol, they erected a new order house. Here they met, here they planned, but in truth there were no new crusades anymore, no streams of pilgrims, no holy walls to guard. Instead of battles, there was administration. Instead of prayer processions to the holy sites, there were only endless discussions on how to organize donations and maintain land. Reports tell of knights who stored their armor and never put it on again. The proud horses stood in stables, the swords rusted in armories. Some saw in Cyprus only a waiting room for a future that never came. Yesterday still celebrated saviors of the faith, today suddenly a secret society full of dark secrets. While the last Knights Templar on Cyprus tried to save their order, a dangerous mixture of envy, rumors, and greed for power brewed in Europe. People saw magnificent Templar courts right in the middle of Paris or London. They heard of chests full of gold, of loans to kings. Many asked themselves, how can a monastic order be so rich? The knights themselves were secretive, their rituals were secret, their archives locked. What once meant discipline was now interpreted as arrogance. Stories made the rounds of idols, of strange rites, of immorality behind monastery walls. An example: King Philip IV of France had debts to the Templars. He needed money, but the knights could not simply be harnessed. So he began to fuel rumors. The Templars, he had whispered, would mock the faith, secretly worship foreign idols. Suddenly, the former heroes were treated as heretics. In inns, horror stories were told of Baphomet, an alleged idol head, of secret rituals in underground halls. Mistrust grows where power acts in shadows. A king deeply in debt, an order rich and unbending. In the end, only betrayal remained. Philip IV, called the Fair, ruled France with an iron hand and a magnificent court. But all the wars against England and Flanders, all the lavish festivals had emptied his treasuries. The Templars, his most loyal lenders, were suddenly more of a burden than a help. They lent him money, but they could not be bought. Philip wanted control, and when he realized that he could not subdue the knights, he forged a plan as ruthless as it was ingenious. On Friday, October 13, 1307, before sunrise, royal troops struck simultaneously throughout France. Templars were dragged from their beds, their archives sealed, their treasuries plundered. The Grand Master Jacques de Molay, currently in Paris, thought he was invited for talks. Instead, he found himself in chains. Overnight, a guest at the royal court became a prisoner for high treason, heresy, and idolatry. Power forgives no rivals. Philip proved how quickly an apparent ally can become the greatest enemy when gold and influence are at stake. After the great wave of arrests, Philip IV faced a problem. There was hardly any evidence for the terrible accusations. Heretics, idolaters. No one had seen anything, except the Knights Templar themselves. So they resorted to a means that in those days was considered a tool of truth: torture. For weeks, for months, knights were chained in dark cells, whipped, stretched on racks. A Templar in Paris later reported he had been kept without sleep for days until he admitted to spitting on a cross, a lie just to finally find peace. Some confessed the most absurd things: secret idol heads, pacts with the devil, secret rituals. Hardly anyone really believed them, but on parchment it was now black on white: the Templars are heretics. Even Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, confessed under torture and later courageously revoked everything he had said. When fear becomes stronger than conviction, truth dies first. The Inquisition taught the world under violence, everyone confesses everything, whether it is true or not. These forced confessions were spread throughout Europe, a pretext for kings and princes to seize property and power. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, was no longer a young fighter when the snares tightened around his order. He had seen countless victories and defeats, advised kings, and planned crusades. But in the dungeon of Paris, he was powerless. After years of imprisonment, endless interrogations, and torture, only one thing remained for him: dignity in the face of the fire. On March 18, 1314, henchmen led him and his faithful companion Geoffroy de Charny to a small island in the Seine. No court, no further trial, only a pyre in the evening wind. Witnesses reported with a firm voice, de Molay revoked his forced confessions one last time. He called on God as a witness to his innocence, and then, it is said, he directed his gaze at King Philip IV and Pope Clement V and spoke a curse. Within a year, you shall stand before God's judgment. What followed made the legend grow. Only a few weeks later, Pope Clement died of an illness. Philip followed in the same year, from hunting accidents to sudden ailments. Honor can be fettered, but not broken. Jacques de Molay died as a man and became a symbol of loyalty into the flames. An order wiped out and yet more alive than ever in our minds. Why could the flames that consumed Jacques de Molay not burn the memory? On the contrary, hardly was the last Grand Master dead when stories grew like mushrooms from the ground. Some whispered the Templars live on in secret, as guardians of the Grail, as architects of hidden empires, as models for the Freemasons. Novels, films, internet forums. To this day their name is a magnet for thirst for adventure, conspiracies, and daydreams. But beyond the myths remains something tangible, a legacy of discipline, community, and a clear mission. Modern organizations study their structure, to this day a clear hierarchy, reliable rules, loyalty across borders. Their early banking system was a forerunner of international financial networks, their castles masterpieces of medieval architecture, and their history a lesson in how power, greed, and politics can triumph over faith when transparency is missing. The true treasure of the Templars lies not in buried chests of gold. It lies in a realization real strength needs clear values. Whoever forgets them loses, even without a sword. The Knights Templar, they were pilgrim guardians, warrior monks, bankers, builders, and legend weavers in one. Their path led them from dusty trails in the Holy Land into the damp dungeons of Paris and further into our books, films, and dreams. Today, centuries later, we speak about their castles, their battles, their secrets. But perhaps we should speak even more about what their true strength was: trust, discipline, and the willingness to live and die for a conviction. May we remember that. A myth fades, but values can remain, and they need no armor, no swords, only people brave enough to carry them. If you enjoyed this journey into the world of the Knights Templar, please leave a like, share this video with other history explorers, and subscribe to the channel so that together we can bring many more forgotten chapters of our past to life. What do you think? Do the Knights Templar live on? Perhaps in our minds, in our stories, in our dreams. Write your thoughts in the comments. I am curious to hear how you see this myth. Until next time, and may the courage of the Knights Templar accompany you on all your paths.